Hello YouTube, this is Froogle, and here we are with a long-awaited look at Lockheed Martin's Prepared. Now, this isn't really a review, it's kind of not even first impressions, so I thought about making an occasional new series called Froogle's Thoughts, and that's probably what I'm going to name this, to be honest. The reason for that is this is very much my personal opinion. A number of people have been asking for my opinion on this product, and it feels a little pompous to put up a video of my personal opinion as opposed to a review or a tutorial or something like that, but so many people have asked for this, I thought it kind of fitting. Now, we're in a slightly different aircraft than normal. This is Just Flight's brand new Canberra, and the reason I'm flying this is it's one of the few aircraft out there at the moment that comes with an installer that will install the aircraft into both FSX and Lockheed Martin's Prepared. It's a study aircraft. I'm not in any way an expert with it or that proficient with it, but it is great fun to fly. I am learning it, so expect a video series on this soon enough. But the reason we're taking this out is it's a nice fast aircraft. It's, as I said, great fun to fly, and it's going to get us up in the air at a decent altitude to look at what Prepared can do fairly rapidly, rather than taking out, say, a Cessna or something like that and doing things a little bit slowly. I'm going to be flying this all manually as well, using Cytec's X55. Now, mentioning Cytec brings us on to an important point. This is Prepared version 2.2 Professional, and Lockheed Martin gave me 90 days to take a look at it. So I have not bought this. I've been given a license for just 90 days to take a look at Prepared, and the reason for that is Lockheed are in partnership with Cytec, and Prepared out of the box supports most of the Cytec hardware, although there are some idiosyncrasies with drivers for the more complex panels. So I'm supposed to be doing some videos on how to set up those panels and get them working in Prepared, but as a byproduct of that, I thought I would take the opportunity to give you guys my impressions of the product. Now, let's get what Prepared is and what Prepared is not out of the way first of all. Prepared is not an entertainment product. It is not a video game. FSX, although it is a very, very complex simulation platform and has some incredibly detailed simulated aircraft in it, notably the aircraft from A2A or even from Real Air Simulations and of course PNDG, FSX is still an entertainment product, and the aircraft and the add-ons that you get for that product are very clearly licensed for use in entertainment. Prepared, however, is not. It is a training tool. It is very much geared at flight simulator training, and we'll go over the license in a little bit more detail later on in the video because I think that's a key point. Also, a lot of people think that Prepared is FSX. It is really not. Microsoft had two simulator platforms. They had one for the professional market called ESP, and then FSX was built on top of ESP. So it took that professional simulator and built an entertainment product on top of it. Prepared, well, Lockheed Martin licensed ESP from Microsoft, and then they built Prepared on top of ESP. So the same way that FSX is built on top of ESP, Prepared is built on top of ESP as well. The big difference, I think, between the two, though, is, as many of you know, Microsoft no longer have a development team supporting ESP or FSX, and haven't for quite some time, and Lockheed Martin do. So in many respects, you can think of this as a bug-fixed, optimized, tweaked, enhanced, and more current version of FSX. I like to think of it as this is what FSX would be if Microsoft had continued to support it. Now, what that means is it is more multi-core aware, so if you have a modern machine with multiple cores in the processor, it will make more active use of those cores. However, it is still a 32-bit application, which means the simulator doesn't care if you have 16 gig, 8 gig, 32 gig, 64 gig, whatever amount of memory in your machine, it is still constrained to use only 3 or 4 gigabytes of memory, just like FSX. That needs to be borne in mind. But in terms of updating it, they have updated the sim and the rendering engine in particular to more fully support modern graphics hardware, which FSX does not. So that means that the platform can offload a lot of processing to your video card. If you have a modern and current video card, like I'm running the GeForce GTX 780 right now, then it makes use of DirectX 11 and brings with it some wonderful new effects such as volumetric clouds, which are semi-transparent clouds, obviously like you have in the real world, volumetric fog, shadowing, better lighting, and so on and so on. You can kind of see it here, in fact. The vapor trails or smoke trails coming out of the back of these engines, they are semi-transparent. You can see through them. The light here, you can see a slight haze around the light, obviously shadows from the aircraft. I don't have all the shadows turned on. I have most of them turned on. We're going to cover that in a little while. Anyway, let's get this aircraft up in the air, and then I can talk through the sim in a little bit more detail. Now, as I said, I'm not an expert with this, so bear with me if I get some things wrong. I will be studying this. It is a study sim, and it deserves that amount of focus, and I've not really given it that yet. Anyway, let me turn Track IR back on. We're going to need it. Now the first thing you're going to notice, of course, I mentioned shadows. You're going to notice them in the cockpit in a second once we turn on the runway. You have full shadowing now in the cockpit, which sometimes, I'm not sure how you get it in FSX, but you can get it in FSX as well, particularly if you're using DirectX 10. I just don't know the rhyme or reason to getting it every single time. But as we turn onto the runway here, you should see a little bit of shadowing going on in the cockpit. Maybe. I know the sun is slightly behind us at this point. You can kind of see it. It's very subtle, which is a great thing. You can see it there, a shadow line creeping down now as we go across. Alright, let me put some flaps down, ready for takeoff. This is a very cool aircraft. It picks up speed in no time at all, as you would expect. Very classic vintage jet. I think Just Flight have done a wonderful job with this. Now, I picked the airport we're flying out of is John Wayne in Orange County, California, where we're doing the pilot edge training, so that's why it looks a little bit familiar. In terms of scenery, it is stock John Wayne scenery and prepared. I am, however, using Orbex FTX Global for the main world textures that you're going to see. Active Sky Next and Rex 4 Texture Direct for the clouds. I'm using the current beta of Active Sky Next, and as you can see with me moving my head around, I am using EasyDock and Track IR. I'm using the beta version of EasyDock, which supports Prepared. Anyway, let's get this up in the air. Let me make sure I got my flaps where I want them to be. I think I do. Increasing power, and let's get airborne. Quite an interesting aircraft to taxi. You're steering on the brakes until the rudder comes alive. You can see the speed is rocketing up now. A little bit of rumble there, which is great. There we go. And rotate. Positive rate, so gear up. And good speed, flaps up. Now the first thing you will have noticed on that takeoff is how smooth this is. A lot of people have said that with Prepared they get much better performance than FSX. I'm not actually finding that. I get an improvement over FSX. I wouldn't say it's much better, really. It is an improvement. The main thing I do notice though is it's smoother. So no matter what I'm doing or where I'm doing it or what the scenery is doing and all that kind of stuff, I tend to get more consistent performance out of the sim than I do in FSX, which can be prone to slowing down and stuttering as you approach dense areas or heavy weather. Now let's just turn over to the right here. Let me turn these landing lights off actually before we go any further. And the taxi lights, which would be that one. Come on, down you come. And that one, there we go. Good. Alright, so let's just bank over to the right and head to the north-northeast. Out over the California scenery here. Now you will have also noticed as well, if you're familiar with my FSX videos, I have quite a lot of detail turned on in the sim right now. Interestingly, the sliders here in FSX, sorry, in Prepared, whoops, are not maxed out, but I'm getting similar results with the sliders kind of midway in Prepared as I do in FSX with them completely maxed out. That's important. We're going to look at the sliders in a lot more detail shortly, and you'll see why that's important. So bear in mind, what you're looking at right now is not Prepared running at its best. What you're looking at right now is Prepared running at its best for me on my machine. These are the settings that I've kind of settled on to use it. Now, one of the big changes, obviously, as I mentioned, is DirectX 11. And volumetric clouds is a major selling point, which means that the cloud should be translucent. Depending on the density of the moisture, obviously, in the cloud, you should be able to see through it. Just like when you walk into a steamy shower, you don't go blind as soon as you walk into the shower. You can still see, and depending on the thickness of the water vapor, you can see more or less. However, it is not, in my experience so far, as amazing as people would like it to be. Let me show you. I'm going to climb up here. Increase in power. We'll climb through this cloud bank up here. Now what you should see as we go into the cloud is the colors of the sky and the scenery will fade out. They should fade towards white as we approach the densest part of the cloud. And then all you should be seeing is water vapor and cloud basically flying past the window until we come out of the cloud on the other side. And you can see it did a very good job there of fading out the scenery, which is great, much better than FSX, but now we're looking at blue, which kind of doesn't make any sense. You could explain that away by saying we're climbing. So you're looking at the blue light of the sky filtering through the water vapor of the cloud, that's why it's blue. I'll show you in a minute that's actually not the case though. Let's keep on climbing, put a bit more power in here, we'll nose up, try to maintain under 250 knots. Until we clear out of that cloud. I probably need to change my point of view actually so we've got a better view of the scenery here. Oops, a little bit too much pitch. There we go. Approaching the top of the cloud now, so now everything's gone white. Now it's a bit more realistic. And that blue suddenly changes to a white, and then the white fades into the blue that it should be. So while volumetric clouds, you can see them floating past the window now, you can see through those clouds, which is a phenomenal thing and very immersive. While volumetric clouds are a great thing and very cool, I think there's still some way to go before they're as accurate as maybe they should be. But anyway. Alright, let me just retrim this aircraft. And I'm going to center track IR, turn it off, and just change my point of view so we have a little bit better view out of the cockpit here as we're flying around. That's a little bit better. You see the volumetric stuff going on there, semi-translucency looking through the cloud down at the scenery. That is very, very cool. Now the other thing that you get obviously is shadowing. So if we turn this around, in fact you can kind of see it back there, the clouds will cast shadows on the ground. That's a feature you can turn on or off. It does put some heavy demands on your machine. There's a big shadow there, see it on the ground from this cloud over the top? That is very, very cool, very immersive, very realistic. I like that. All in all, the rendering engine is greatly improved. It does reduce the load on the sim quite a lot, giving you smoother performance, better performance as we said in some cases, and a much more realistic view out of the window, which is great. Let's keep on banking over here because I did see some nice shadows on the ground from that massive cloud bank over there. Look, there's the translucency. That is very, very cool. And you can see there the ground colours slightly different over there because of that heavy cloud that's over the top of them. Now I said as we climbed out, you could explain away the blueness as we got into the thick cloud by virtue of the fact that we were climbing towards the blue sky. Let's just show that that's actually not the case. And I don't mean to labour a point and make the sim look bad. I actually quite like this. But again, this is an opinion video more than anything else, so I'll give you my conclusions at the end. And it's not cut and dried as to whether this is the sim you should go to if you are a die-hard FSX fan and don't want to look at X-Plane. It's not a cut and dried answer, it really isn't. But we'll explain why later on. So here we go, I'm diving down towards the ground now. Coming back off to power, we got quite a rate of descent now into the thick part of the cloud, and oh look, it's turned blue again. Even though you can clearly see from the artificial horizon that we are hurtling towards the green mass that is the ground. Not cool. Let's pull out of that before we do some damage to somebody's house. Anyway, now the other thing that we haven't looked at yet is, as I said, the sliders here are not maxed out, but if you look at the scenery as it flies past the window of the cockpit, it's actually very smooth. No matter what I'm doing, whether I'm high up, whether I'm going through thick cloud, whether I'm low to the ground as I currently am, you'll see that those trees are moving past the frame of the canopy here at a very smooth rate, which is very, very, very cool indeed. If you're used to flying in a dense scenery area like this in FSX, you know that quite often you'll be looking at those trees there hurtling past my window, and you'll see them stuttering a little bit. Not smooth, not consistent. That is a big, big, big plus for Prepar3d. The other big plus, of course, is that it has been largely bug fixed and tweaked from FSX. So while it can crash occasionally, I think those crashes tend to be more down to third-party programming with add-ons than anything else. But you do tend to get a lot less of them than you have in FSX. Also, the memory management has been tweaked quite a lot as well. So the dreaded out-of-memory error that you get in FSX tends to appear a hell of a lot less in Prepar3d because they're doing much better work with how they're managing memory. One of the problems with FSX, for example, is if you fly, say, London Gatwick to Orlando, and in doing so you pass over some very, very detailed airports that you have installed at let's say, New York and Cardiff and Dublin and places like that, then FSX will actually load those scenery objects into memory even though you're cruising at 40,000 feet and have no intention of landing there, and it's not very good at getting them out of memory either. So that's how you ultimately end up with a dreaded out-of-memory error. Plus, using photorealistic textures and things like that can also add to the load on your machine. And being a 32-bit application, you are constrained to a fairly small amount of memory, which is very easy to fill up very quickly. Anyway, I'm pushing quite close to the ground here just to show you that the sim doesn't really slow down. It maintains smoothness no matter what I'm doing. And I can start really taxing the sim a little bit here. Let's put some power in and just rotate the view. Put in some extensive 3D math there. Again, nice and smooth. No dramatic slowdowns, no stuttering, no pausing. It's pretty awesome. I love this sim for that. I love this sim for the reduced amount of crashes. I love it for not getting out of memory errors. Now, as I said, this is the camera from Just Flight, and it is one of the few, and it is currently few, aircraft that come with an installer for both FSX and Prepared. Some publishers are producing their aircraft to install into both sims. Some add-on developers, like FSUIPC, I'm currently running FSUIPC. Some add-on developers do that as well. Some publishers are doing a separate licensing deal. I know A2A today, in fact, or this weekend, just announced that there is a separate license and a separate fee for the Prepared license, not necessarily version, but Prepared license of their aircraft, like the 172, and no doubt the Cherokee that's about to release as well. PMDG have said that when they finally move over to Prepared, because Prepared is an academic platform, not an entertainment platform, then whatever products they bring over to this platform will also be available at a different fee and under a different license. It won't be a joint installer. On the other hand, you do have companies like Aerosoft, the Aerosoft Airbus X, the Twin Otter, for example, both have an installer that will install into both FSX and Prepared without any issue, which is pretty cool. Anyway, I'm just looking at the scenery right now. Let me put this back up high in the air and we can see how far into the distance we can see, the draw distance and stuff like that, and we'll talk a little bit more once we get up there about other issues and other concerns, and also the other features of Prepared, what makes it different and what makes it very much the same as FSX. Anyway, just enjoy the climb for now. Now, as we climb up here, you can see some atmospheric scattering going on. Atmospheric scattering is where objects of interest in the distance will fade out. They don't tend to just pop in. They actually fade out as they do in real life. So you can see mountain ranges over here very, very dimly in the distance. This one more clearly now as we come out of the haze of that low cloud there. Fading in, fading out. Proper atmospheric scattering, which is a very big plus for the rendering engine over FSX as well. Here we are at 10,000 feet. Let's bring this a little bit level. You can see some low-lying clouds in the valleys up ahead. Very convincing, but not really that much different to what you could achieve with Active Sky Next and Rex 4 Texture Direct in FSX, particularly if you're using DirectX 10. But it is pretty convincing looking. You see that? Very nice. Now, while we're up here, let me pop to an external view. And I'm going to pause the sim. Now, the reason I'm going to pause it is we're going to look at the options to really ramp the level of detail up here and show you what Prepared can really look like with everything turned up. And that's where it really differentiates itself, I think, from FSX in terms of visuals at least, but it does put a huge demand on the machine. Those of you that have seen my videos before know my machine is no slouch when it comes to FSX, and I have FSX pretty well tuned to give me fairly consistent performance, but Prepared does really smoke it in the visuals if you turn everything up, but on the flip side my machine starts to groan under the weight. Let's go through the menus first of all. I have an add-ons menu just like FSX because it is at its core the same platform as FSX, that being ESP. So there's my add-ons menu, EasyDock, the beta that I have installed, FSUIPC, and so on and so on. I even got GSX managed to be installed in here, which is great as well. You'll notice as well, if you're quite astute, that there's no title bar at the top here in how I'm running Prepared, but you can see the taskbar. There is a full screen mode available if you're running. I'm not sure if it's in the academic version. I know it is in the professional version here, and I'm running full screen mode, but it's not actually full screen. What it is a borderless window that takes up the whole screen, which is why you can still see my border at the bottom. On the plus side, it means that if you do pop up something like, let's pop up the EasyDock Studio, you can see it doesn't blank out the sim behind this window. The sim stays visible, and I can keep doing stuff either in this add-on, in this pop-up window here, or in the sim behind the scenes, which is great if you're used to alt-tabbing between things like, I don't know, PFPX for your flight plan, or Ablesoft DFB if you're following the flight that way, or even a web browser with SkyVector, which is kind of cool. It takes a little bit of getting used to. Notice here the views menu is almost identical to FSX, so I can bring up new views and it looks just like the FSX one. Same on view mode and so on and so on. Options, we're going to go through this in a little while, but the options menu looks almost identical again to the FSX one, as does the world menu, as does vehicles, and so on and so on. The difference here, now this is the pro version, as I said, of Prepared, so I have a sim director option here. Now what sim director is that's a full mission builder and tutorial builder for flight instruction and mission planning. Bear in mind, Lockheed Martin are a military contractor, so their ultimate intent, I think, with licensing ESP was to build a military platform that they can put their own aircraft and third-party aircraft into and do full mission planning. That's really where Sim Director comes in. We're not going to look at that today. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. What we are going to look at, though, is the options. So we're going to settings, going to display. Now you can see things look very different. So a number of options here in image and texture quality, which you previously only had access to if you were editing FSX config file by hand. For example, the texture resolution here. Texture filtering, I can change the level of anisotropic filtering, which you can't do in FSX, obviously. You typically do that externally to the sim with something like NVIDIA Inspector. FXAA, I've currently got turned off. I could turn that back on. It doesn't, I haven't found it makes a significant difference, although Lockheed do warn you here it may decrease performance. I haven't found a big difference turning that on, but we are going to turn that on now. So let's quit out of the options menu. I want to show you this. Embed this in your brain. So there's a slight jagged edge on the tail, on the trailing edge of this wing, slight jagged edge on the leading edge of the tail here, or sorry, the elevator wrist stabilizer there and there. Bear in mind those jagged edges. Look at the textures down here. Look at how crisp some of them are, how not crisp some of them are. Look at the clouds in the distance. Let's start turning options on, and I can show you what this starts to really look like. So if we turn on FXAA and click on OK, didn't really do very much. Some of that jagginess has now been kind of blurred out a little bit, and the same on this trailing edge of the wing here. The textures in the scenery itself didn't really get affected. The key stuff, though, really comes once you start jumping into scenery. Now, as I said, I don't have everything maxed out, but I'm getting the same kind of effects out of Prepared currently that I would get out of FSX if I had everything maxed out. So let's go ahead and turn this up. So I'm currently on level of detail radius at Ultra. We'll basically turn that up to 11, which is max. We'll turn scenery complexity up to ridiculous, auto gen vegetation up to ridiculous, auto gen buildings up to ridiculous. Water detail is on ultra. Reflections here refer to reflections in water. So yes, we'll reflect the clouds, the terrain, vegetation, my aircraft, sim objects, and buildings. Bathymetry doesn't really apply to us in the flight simulation world. It's really underwater terrain. So as I mentioned, this is a now somewhat a general simulation platform as far as Lockheed are concerned. You could realistically put tanks in it. They have put submarines in it. That's really where bathymetry comes into play. So let's turn all that lot on. We'll look at lighting in a second, which is the real frame rate killer. But for now, we'll click on OK. Now, just like in FSX, you get that loading delay if you change any significant options. So it's going to go through now and load everything in. And it looks kind of funky as it does so. You can see it's actually blanked out all the scenery except for the clouds. Not sure why the clouds remain. So it's going to load all that stuff in, and then you'll see it start to draw in. And it can take a few seconds actually to draw that stuff in, but it's a one-time pause. Once it's gone through the drawing, it actually came up pretty quick. Then it's done. So everything maxed up, and again, it actually does not look that different. Let's turn the camera around. We got a lot of autogen over here. That's a little bit more complex, I think. It's hard to tell. Definitely more complex down there. Look at the autogen kicking in down here already. So tons of buildings looking straight underneath us. This is a forest. You can tell it's a forest. There are trees everywhere. So highly detailed autogen. Now what I'm going to do is bring up the in-sim frame rate thing. Now I don't actually trust this in FSX. I certainly don't trust it in Prepared. It's more a simulator rate than a frame rate, but we'll bring that up. I'm currently locked at 35. I'm holding around about 34, 32 to 34 in the pause. So we'll unpause this. And it's doing pretty well. High 20s, low 30s, pretty good. So maxing out all the detail here actually did not have a significant effect on my performance. I've dropped maybe 5 frames because we are hitting the mid-20s a few times now. And I found, this is the strange thing with this, it doesn't instantly look amazing when you do that. It's only when you spend some time actually flying around and doing stuff, you start to really grasp how cool that is. Look at this now. And this is what I was saying about it knocking FSX out of the water. It actually does look very, very good. Especially with the atmospheric scattering in the distance. It looks good. And with that level of auto-gen, it's very, very convincing that I'm flying over an urban area right now. Looks fabulous. But not significantly different yet to FSX. It grows on you though. It really does grow on you over time. So with that said, let me reset track IR. And we will pause the sim once again. Let's go and turn on the heavy hitters in terms of frame rate. That's a pretty good view actually, because we can just pan around here and get a nice view now of this urban area. In particular these tall buildings. Okay, keep an eye on these tall buildings here and here. And maybe the hills in the distance, because there's some clouds over here. We want to see some shadowing as I turn the options up here. So I'm going to go into options. Go into settings, display once again. Go into lighting now. Now this is where we have a whole new set of options that we never had in FSX before. Lighting, I can turn on where the landing lights illuminate the ground. Great. Lens flare, great. High dynamic range lighting, great. We like that. It's a bit more realistic than normal flat color view that you have in FSX. Now shadows are where the real differences come in. I'm going to turn shadows up to ultra. And I've got a checkbox here, enable the terrain to receive shadows. That's really where your cloud shadows come in. If you have that checkbox checked, then clouds are going to cast shadow on the land underneath, which is great. Now I'm going to turn cloud shadow cast distance up to about 30,000 meters. We will put on terrain shadow cast. Now this is the ability for a mountain, for example, to cast a shadow over a nearby town, which is a pretty cool thing as well. Object shadow cast. This is where your tall buildings are casting shadows on the land around them. We're going to turn that up to about let's put out 3,000 meters. And then finally here you can define which objects cast and receive shadows. So the internals of my aircraft obviously are casting shadows. You saw them somewhat so far in this flight. External vehicles, great. Sim objects, vegetation, so the trees can cast shadows, and they can also now receive shadows. So buildings, vegetation, sim objects, and my aircraft can all both cast and receive shadows. This is now pretty much maxed out. I can go nuts and increase this all the way up to a stunning 80,000 meters away, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but I could if I wanted to. Let's just click on OK. It's going to have a little think there, and I'm going to unpause the sim. And we'll see how that does. Now my frame rate's taken a hit. Not a significant one, but it has taken a hit. Now I'm getting, gosh, mid to high teens and low 20s. But this is where the sim really comes onto its own. You can see different lighting down here now. Reflection out of my canopy, different lighting down here. You can see some variation in the colors, more variation I think, in the colors of the landscape. And as we get a little bit closer down here, it's actually not working too well, I think, because of my position and where the sun is. But you will be able to see visible shadows cast by some of these buildings. But you'll certainly see it over the landscape. So let me just fly this aircraft. I'm going to reset to track IR. Let's fly this aircraft over to where we know there are some shadows casting on the ground. Oh, look at that shadow there as it moved right across the cockpit. Now that was a cloud shadow, interestingly. So we're seeing sunlight shadows now. So sunlight making shadows because of elements of the canopy and the cockpit behind me, casting shadows on the internals and that front dash of the cockpit. But also we had a cloud there. As we passed underneath the cloud, it cast a shadow on us, which is phenomenal. That's really cool. And you can see different lighting over here now. There you go. Very, very subtle. As we get a little bit lower and head towards some of these mountains, you'll see more shadowing in the valleys around the mountain as well. You see a little bit of shadowing down here on these trees, see them? Shadows stretching backwards a little bit here. The sim obviously doing a vast amount of work at this point, which is why my frame rates are suffering. But even so, my performance I don't think is that much less than what many people are currently getting at mid to max details in FSX. And it certainly does look, I think, pretty damn realistic now, especially as we head into these forested hills here. It looks pretty good. And there's a nice big cloud. Where's the nearest big cloud? I think that's the nearest one over there, isn't it? Let's see if we can fly under that and see what it does for us. It might not do a lot because it's not a big cumulus cloud, but we'll fly that way anyway. You can look around the scenery as we do. You see it's getting a little bit juddery now. Not really stuttering though, and this is the cool thing I think with Prepared, is it maintains consistency. So my frame rate, I think, in my opinion, for my PC right now is consistently pretty poor, but it's not suddenly getting worse. Oh, look at that. Look at that mountain up ahead, hills fading in there out of the haze and the cloud. Very, very, very cool. And you can see over here on the left-hand side, the difference in lighting on the ground between sunlight hitting the ground, slight cloud shadows from that light cloud up ahead hitting the ground. It is very realistic. It is very immersive. It is a considerable step forward over FSX. It's actually pretty good. I don't think we're going to be able to be effective at getting that cloud to cast a shadow on us again. I think we've kind of lost our opportunity there. The big cloud that would do that is over on our right, quite a way away. So before we dive into real opinion, if I even have one at this point, to be honest, of Prepared, especially Prepared versus FSX, because they are basically at their core the same platform. Let's just talk a little bit about limitations. Now, although it is the core, at its core, the same platform, and it is largely compatible with FSX add-ons, and some publishers are publishing installers that will work in both sims, FSX and Prepared, it is not fully compatible with FSX. Now, what I do to install add-ons, so I've got Majestic-8 installed in here, and it works. It's got some issues, but they don't support Prepared yet. What I did to install that was I got a tool, I bought a tool called, I think it's Flight Estonia's migration tool. And when you run that, it really just tricks add-ons into thinking that you have FSX. And it tricks them into thinking that Prepared is FSX. So while that tool is running, when you run up an installer, it suddenly thinks that FSX is installed at the same location as Prepared, and to all intents and purposes they are installing into FSX, when in reality they're actually installing into Prepared. And by and large it works pretty well, but there are quite a lot of add-ons that just don't work. There's quite a lot that do, and there's quite a lot that don't. I think there's a forum post over on AvSim, you can go and search for it. Look at the shadows here, by the way, these clouds on the ground. Very cool. If we head over that way, we'll probably get a cloud casting shadow on us. So let's do that. There is a list, I think, posted on AvSim in the unofficial Prepared forum there, showing what does work and what does not work. So if you're thinking of switching from FSX to Prepared, you might want to go and consult that list and look for your favorite aircraft and your favorite add-ons to see how well supported they are. So for example, I've got Majestic-8 installed. It does work. It does have some quirks, but on the flip side, FS2Crew for the Dash 8 does not work at all. FS2Crew does work for Aerosoft's Airbus X, but then Aerosoft's Airbus X supports Prepared. So on and so on. PMDG have already said that they do not support their aircraft running in Prepared, so I've not even tried to install them. And that's just fine. I have actually started looking at alternatives, because in some respects I quite like Prepared. So I've started looking at iFly's 737, for example, to see if I can get a nice 737 within Prepared, until PMDG announced their full academic support for the platform. Nope, that shadow's not going to do much for us here. So let's get into my opinion. What do I think of this? Now, as I said, I'm going to pause this for a second. As I said, oops, I brought up a new window. I have this for just 90 days. It has not been provided to me for free, and the real purpose of that 90 days thing, how do I close that window, is to research the platform, start getting some videos done that would help SciTech and SciTech users in getting their complex panels, the radio panels, the switch panels and stuff like that working within this platform. But I'm taking this opportunity as well to give you guys my thoughts on it. Here's the thing. Let me pop up a browser here. The main problem for me has always been and remains the license. Okay? Now, I'm not a lawyer. I just know how to read a table. Now, this is a table with check marks, and it makes sense to me that where there's a check mark, that means you can use the product. So let's look here. These are the three licenses that apply to most people in the community right now: professional, academic, and developer, and they have considerably different costs. Developer license is $9.95 per month, academic, which is what I see most people buying, is the $60 product. Now, looking at the check marks, you could only realistically comply with a license for $60 if you are under the age of 18. Sorry, if you are organizing an after-school program for children up to the age of 18, that's what K through 12 means if you're not from America. If you are a student, a K through 12 student interested in training, instruction, simulation, so just flying planes and learning how to fly, and obviously learning about aviation, then this applies to you. If you are an undergraduate student, again interested in training, instruction, simulation, or learning, then the $60 product applies to you. It does not apply to anybody else. You have to be an undergraduate student. You have to be a K through 12 student, or you have to be organizing a K through 12 after school program. That's the $60 license. There is no other room for interpretation as far as I can see. Everybody else, unless you're a developer down here, needs to be over here. The $200 professional license, the license that I'm currently using, if that gives you the, you are complying with that professional license if you are training as a pilot, if you are using it to instruct people, if you are just learning about aviation and simulation, or if you just have an interest in simulation in general. So the vast majority of FSX users, except those who simply want to smash into the ground repeatedly, those who are interested in simulating flight, are able to use Prepared, but it would be the professional license. That's the key for me. $200. So the question then becomes, everything you've seen so far, is it worth $200? We're talking about a simulator here that is basically at its core FSX, bug fixed and enhanced. So it is more reliable, it is smoother, it is more consistent, it crashes a lot less, it does perform better, it does support modern hardware, and is all of those enhancements worth $200? Now this is my second, third or fourth time trying to do this video. I keep on not really being happy with the result. And what I said in a previous take on this was, if I had to make a decision today that I could no longer use Prepared unless I put down $200, would I do it? I don't know. I really don't know. I don't think I would. You know, a lot of the add-ons I use do not run or are not supported in Prepared. So the PMDG aircraft, for example, do not run and are not supported in Prepared. That's a problem for me. So it's $200 to run a limited subset of aircraft in a bug-fixed, enhanced, tweaked, optimized, and, let's be honest, vastly improved version of FSX. $200 for that privilege. Do I think that's worth it? I'm not really sure that I do. But on the other hand, today, A2A have been gearing up to launch the Cherokee. Now, I've seen what they've been talking about with the 172. The 172 does fully support Prepared. I have no doubt that there will be a version of the Cherokee or a license of the Cherokee which fully supports Prepared. And I'm thinking of getting the video done on that. And I'm thinking, do I really want to go and do it in FSX? And this is the thing. People who watch my live streams know that more and more I've been coming to the conclusion that after flying Prepared an extended amount of time, I actually don't kind of relish the idea of going back to FSX. But again, at the end of the day, there's still that $200 fee attached to it. And is it worth it? I honestly don't know. I honestly don't have an answer right now. I guess we'll find out in about 30 days or so when my 90 days is up. And at that point, I have to make a decision. To continue using this legally, I would have to put down $200 because that's the only license that I comply with. So we'll find out in about 30 days whether I do decide to put down $200 and buy the professional version of this or not. So a little bit non-committal. But I hope I've showed you enough that you can kind of make up your own mind as to whether you want to do it. Now, I have mentioned in the past, Lockheed are not checking licenses. You could realistically go and buy the academic license, and I know many people have, and they shouldn't have. You could realistically go and do that. The police aren't going to come knocking at your door. You're not going to get arrested. But for me personally, I like to comply with those things. I like to do the right thing. It is certainly a very attractive sim, even with everything maxed out and my frame rate suffering like now. Look at that very subtle shading down here. The density of the autogen down here. The atmospheric scattering of objects in the distance kind of fading in and fading out. All these things contribute to make a much better sim experience, as does the smoothness, as does the overall general consistency of the platform. It is, without doubt, a better FSX. And I didn't know whether I would be able to say that before I started looking at it, but I can say that. This is a far, far better simulator than FSX. The question is whether or not it is worth $200 if you are already invested in FSX. I'm not sure yet. Anyway, I hope this did answer some questions. I hope it gave you some insight into Prepared and my thought processes that are going on with it right now. As always, my name is Froogle. I hope to see you soon.